Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
It is our privilege to bring to you the third week in our final week in the series entitled Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, Allies in Transition. We're very happy to welcome to the program Titawhai Harawira, who is with us from New Zealand. As to her background, she comes to us as a spokesperson for the Maori Nation in New Zealand. She has a very fascinating and wonderful background. We're excited to discuss with her this background and her experience. For example, she is a member of the Executive Committee of the Pacific People's Anti-Nuclear Action Committee, a primary proponent of the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone. She also is very actively involved as a spokesperson for the Maori people struggle for self-determination. Some of the issues that she would like to discuss involves land issues, fishing rights, Maori women's rights, and the nationalist movement of her people. She is a health consultant, and she is head of the Maori unit at Carrington Mental Institution. It's my very special privilege to welcome you to our city of Coeur d'Alene, our state of Idaho in the Northwest. We're so delighted to have you with us, and we thank you for having this opportunity to question you on this very important subject.
Thank you, and it's lovely to be here. And I would like to bring the greetings of my people and the Maori Nation, one to the Indian people and the Indian Nation of the Great Turtle Island, and secondly, my Maori people asked me to bring their support for Jesse Jackson in his bid to take over the running of this large country. So I have 2 or 3 very special missions that I was asked to undertake on this journey.
And I'm very happy to welcome to the panel regular panelist Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and I shall ask Steve to commence our questioning with you today.
Thank you,
Tony. I must admit to being very uninformed when it comes to the Maori Nation, and not terribly informed either when it comes to the question of New Zealand. I wonder if you would take just a few minutes to tell us something about the history of the Maori people and about their homeland in New Zealand.
Certainly. New Zealand, as you know it, for my people was named Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. And my people lived there for years. They come from the land, they developed the land, and they have lived and worked the land for many years. The British came and colonized us, and in 1840 they offered us a treaty called the Treaty of Waitangi that guaranteed us our land and our fisheries and our language. And today, out of 66 million acres, we only have 2 million acres left in Maori control. Our language is not recognized. We have the highest unemployment. Our housing is very, very bad, and our health is in a terrible state. And so for us today, we align ourselves very closely with the needs and the struggles of First Nation people throughout the world, and the Indian movement as well. And we're actually part of the Indian Treaty Council. We find it's important to share our struggles so that we learn strategies for survival and development for sovereignty. And we are really busy at the moment working in those areas to survive and being part of this conference that talks about international trade between New Zealand and America and Australia and America. It's really important for me to be here to actually remind people that there are benefits for some in trading, but there's a lot of suffering for the people of the land who are ignored and who have no benefits from that trading.
You mentioned fishing, so I take it that was an important historical part of the Maori's lifestyle.
Yes, many of my people live near the ocean, and they developed a way of life that included 90% of the diet coming from the sea. And, getting those fishing rights back is really important for our people. and we're in the middle of doing just that at the moment.
What was the rest of the basis of the traditional Maori lifestyle in terms of sustenance?
Well, the land that provided the sustenance for our people, the forestry, the whole way of life, our leadership, our education, that was all contained within our culture, our language. And to deny a people its language, as happened in 1886 to our people, the legislation was introduced to prevent us speaking Maori, and my grandparents and my parents were strapped for speaking Maori in the school, so that you almost have a generation of Maoris who don't speak the language. But nevertheless, we have gone along as Maori women and decided that we would teach all our preschool children the language. And it's been wonderful, the whole renaissance and revival of the language. It's been terrific. But we have not seen the education department move to cater for those fluent Maori speaking children. And so what we are doing now is setting up our own schools where our teachers are able to come in and teach all the subjects in Maori. So when the question of education is being talked about, our concern is whose education and for whose benefit.
I get the feeling from our early conversation here that there are many parallels between the Maori people in New Zealand and Native American tribes in the United States. I believe that most, if not all, of Native American tribes had no written history. Their history was passed down as an oral tradition from elders to the next generation. Is that also true of the Maori?
That's also true of our people and most indigenous people, you will find. And that's an art that we almost lost, but we are beginning to revive along with our language. The ability to maintain and retain our history unto ourselves.
Is there a new source, and I think this is it's always hard for white people to try to take the role of Native Americans in this country, but my sense of it is that one of the real dilemmas that Native Americans are in today in the United States is the desire to hold on to their culture and their history and their past, and a need from economic necessity to assimilate into white culture, especially when it comes to jobs, job seeking. Are there any, is the traditional lifestyle an option for the Maori people any longer, or are they facing that same problem?
We're facing the same problem, but I guess along with the American Indians and other First Nation people, our culture is adaptable. Our language is adaptable. We have Maori words for the dollar. I mean, my ancestors never had the dollar. So it's a live and living language and a culture that can adapt, given the resources to allow it to adapt. And I guess this is where the big gap is between the white man and his development and culture and way of life, and that for us, we're saying there are a lot of things within our culture that we want to retain. We want to be able to participate as a partner with the developing world, and we're capable of doing that. But we would like those resources in our control. For instance, I am the Maori health consultant in Aotearoa, and for the first time in the history of our country, we have a Maori unit in Maori control. The hospital board has given over resources to me to develop a resource in Maori control for Maori people, and it's working 100%.
I get the feeling also from your early comments, especially your comment about Jesse Jackson's candidacy here in the United States, that the Maori are aware that struggle for survival as a people, certainly when you talk about resources, those are political issues,
yes,
and that you have to become politically active to make any strides in those areas. Tell us a little bit about how that organization is forming and
well, in
shape.
Aotearoa, Maoris don't have any political power or any economical power, but that hasn't stopped us from getting out there and doing things that say, hey, we want to be part of this development, hey, we want a part of that cake, or we want the whole lot, if necessary, where things, are desperately wrong for our people. And giving our support to Jesse Jackson, and indeed to non-white leaders throughout the world, is really important. It says a lot of things about we as non-white people are the majority of this world, and this world doesn't look too good to us. The nuclear age is certainly not one that makes us feel secure. And maybe, just maybe, we have a better recipe to run the world than what is happening at the moment.
I would like to deal with two very specific issues that you have identified within your struggle, and one of them is back to the issue of fishing rights. Mm-hmm. What is the situation today with relation to the New Zealand government, and what are your demands upon that government to deal with this particular problem?
Well, the fact of the matter is today that the Japanese and everybody else come in and take our fish. We have to pay $20 a kilo for the fish that's plentiful on our shores, and we as Maori people are today are using the Treaty of Waitangi to say you guaranteed us these fishing rights, and we are now demanding that you implement those rights and have it recognised in law. And it is happening. After 140 years, we now have the treaty being recognised in law. But, I mean, nothing has shifted into Maori control. We've stopped that whole process of being ignored. Okay?
Are you using the court system in which
we're using the courts, and we're using our, based on the Treaty of Waitangi, and saying, we're the other partner of this treaty, and you've had 150 years of ignoring us and not honouring our treaty. Now we are going to use the courts, one, to stop the government selling off Crown land into private enterprise and overseas companies, and two, to have a look at the fishing rights of our people based on the Treaty of Waitangi. It's quite an exciting time in Aotearoa. There's a whole renaissance within the Maori world that says, hey, it's good to be Maori all of a sudden after being ignored for so long, and it is possible to argue our rights.
And I take it from your comments that your courts are beginning to recognize that very, very long violated law of the treaty itself and begin to rule in cases.
Right, right.
Also, you have dealt with women's rights, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I interpret that to mean that within the Maori nation itself, that women have not had an equal role with the male population. Is that correct?
No, that's not really. For us as Maori women, we were landholders, we were chieftainess, and we were heads of tribes, and all those things before white man's Christianity arrived in Aotearoa. And with the whole white male image of Christianity began the move to promote our men away from our women. And it's been quite a difficult area to regain that foothold, you know, equal with our men, using all the arguments that Christianity uses and saying, well, you know, if Christ recognised us as being okay, who is meant to put us down? And we use all those arguments. But today, as a result of 2 world wars and the war in Vietnam, where we lost a lot of our men who would have been our leaders today, and our women, we are a very young nation. 75% of Maoridom are under 25. 70% of Maoridom are Maori women, and that's why we're so strong. It's wonderful.
Is there still some resistance for this influence that came from the white man into your nation? Is there some resistance from some of your men yet, though?
Oh, a lot of resistance, but that's okay. You know, we just get on doing the real things and getting on with life. We haven't got time to worry about those little things that men get upset with. We want to get on and help to save our people.
Steve Sheen.
We talked about fishing rights, and that's an area that you're pursuing in the courts. You also mentioned earlier that from an original land mass of 66 million acres, I think Maori now can claim as their own only slightly more than 2 million or 3 million, something like that.
2 million.
What about the land issue? That is an issue in this country with the Native Americans. Is it also an issue with the Maori?
It's a big issue. I guess for First Nation people throughout the world, land is a spiritual tie that we have with the land. We are of the land is of us. We come from the land and we go back to the land. And so to survive as a people, the land base is really important to stabilize a people. And so the struggle for land is not land as a commodity, but land to keep our people stable, land to keep our people strong, and to keep our nation strong, and to share, not to covet unto oneself.
It's very interesting to me, again, to draw parallels, because we did a show not too long ago with a member of the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and he explained to us that the concept of ownership of land to Indians was, they couldn't conceive of that men and women didn't own the land. They were of the land. Very similar to what you just expressed.
True.
Health issues, we also talked about those. You said there's a serious health problem among the Maori people?
Yes.
What's the basis for that?
Well, I guess stress is the main issue there. A people being rendered powerless is always going to be in stress. The stress of unemployment, the stress of lack of proper accommodation, proper food, the ability to provide properly for your family, the ability for the men to be the head of the household because of the high unemployment. That in turn creates a lot of stress and anger. And how do you deal with that? We're only 10% of the population, but 60% of my people are ending up in mental institutions. Now, that's got to be a big area of concern, and that's why I'm working there. I want to work with my people and say to the psychiatrists and psychologists, you don't have a right to lock my people up or to medicate them so that they shuffle around like vegetables and have them ignored. People in stress need to be cared for with people skills, without the medication, without locking them up. And it's working wonderfully. I've been working there for 5 years now, and it's a real challenge to a medical module, I guess, that's been in place for some years.
Is New Zealand, does it have the same kind of a socialized medical system that Great Britain has?
Yes.
And is that government medical agency, in a sense, is it responsible for the kind of program you described earlier, the medication and the institutionalization of those patients?
I mean, hospitals prop up this huge drug program that's administered into people's bodies that creates a vegetable out of people simply because they're in stress. And there's got to be a different way to care for people in stress.
I would guess that government medical system puts that whole issue back into the political sphere once again.
That's right.
There are, I think, some other issues that, and you touched on one earlier. You talked about the nuclear age and that perhaps it's not the right way for the world to be moving. What other kinds of political issues does the Maori Nation embrace?
Well, I guess the nuclear issue for us is a vitally important one within the Pacific. I belong to the Nuclear Free and Independent Pacific Movement. In fact, I head that and have done since 1975. And it talks about peace and justice, because we don't believe you can have peace without justice. And if you're talking about justice, you're talking about First Nation people, their land rights, their right to their language, their right to survive with the resources to do it. And it's not just peace and isolation. And it's going to have a domino effect in New Zealand and Australia and throughout the Pacific. Our right to be nuclear free, that other nations don't have the right to stockpile on our back door, to have their ships there, or even to test, like the British and the Americans and the French. We in the Pacific are concerned about our survival. But despite all those concerns, we're going to come to America and challenge you and take away your cup from little old New Zealand. We're definitely going to do that. We've got energy, time, and lots of go to involve ourselves in those sort of challenges, as well as reminding the world that the Pacific is populated with people. It's not a vast open space. It's not. We live there. We feel good about living there. We feel good about being nuclear free. It's wonderful.
I have a really difficult political problem to present to you. You're so articulate and you're so, I can tell, informed on the political process, and I want to take advantage of your expertise. In this country, we have had some very serious problems for a very long time that you have addressed. But some change has come to this country, and it came, I think, two ways. One is that those who had felt and experienced lots of discrimination, the black population, comprises about 11% of our total population, which is a significant percentage in the election process, particularly concentrated in certain states. Also, the Hispanic community in this country is very significant in size and has political clout from that. In addition to that, we have had leaders such as the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. To cement that movement. Mm-hmm. And so based on that comment, in your own country, since you have indicated that you're a small percentage of the population, which in the process of voting makes it more difficult for you, I have a two-part question. Do you have allies with other groups in your country? And two, are some political leaders emerging to help address this outside of the courts in the election process of officers?
Well, yes, we have some very strong political leaders, yes. But we only have 4 seats in the government that has 94 seats. And that's been in place for about 120 years now. And that hasn't changed to mark time with the increase in the population. Population-wise, we should actually have 12 seats. So there's a lot of problems there. And we find it's better to lobby outside, as a people, outside the government, rather than to rely on the 4 seats that they allocate us only to the Labour Party. And we have a lot of allies. I've worked for 10 years with church organisations and most Pākehā organisations, white organisations in Aotearoa, talking about racism and how it affects us as Indigenous people, about the ability of the majority to impose their language and lifestyle on another people. That's what we call racism. And I've worked for 10 years with Pākehā organisations to say, hey, we want to be part of this developing country, of whatever is happening in our country. We want to be part of it. We want you to share that power and those resources with us. And so, over 10 years, we've built up a lot of allies doing just that work. The church is speaking out and supporting our right and our demands to have our treaty honoured. The whole issue of the nuclear free and independent movement in Aotearoa and in the Pacific is supported by all the churches. But it's taken about 10 years of hard work to keep talking, and I believe that you have to keep talking. I think that's really important, that we don't continue to think, well, our way of life is the way to go. Other people have rights, and we begin to recognise the differences and accommodate them without being patronising. I guess for the majority culture that isn't always easy, and we certainly don't allow the whites to patronise us in Aotearoa. And they think they're doing things real marvellous sometimes, and then we say, hey, that's really not the way we want to go. Let's start again. And that sort of dialogue, that sort of challenge is resulting in a hospital board and health departments saying, okay, we've failed for you in the health area. Here are the resources, and how else can we help? That is the beginning of that partnership, and I think that other nations should actually have a look at that.
I would love to get advice from you on another point when dealing with the problems of racism. I've been honored to be selected the head of a human rights group here in the Northwest that is an umbrella of all the racial and ethnic groups, and we're only a year old. And as we move into dealing with some problems, it is the consensus on that board by many ethnic communities that the real way to get at racism in the long run is through the educational process, that you must start with children to teach the wrongs of prejudice and racism. Would you like to comment on that, and can we eradicate prejudice, and can we see the day come when that it will not be the problem it is today, and is it through the educational system?
I don't think you can ever eradicate prejudice. It's people's right to dislike one another. It's fine to be prejudiced. It doesn't worry me, and I don't think it should really upset a whole lot of people. But when you're racist, it's totally different. There's a vast difference between racism and prejudice. I can be prejudiced because I don't like the way you teach, or don't like the way you build a house, or don't like you as a neighbour. But if you're racist, you then have the power to impose your will, your lifestyle, and your language, your education on a people. And that's a vast difference. And yes, education is important, but I think we should begin from the top. It's of little use beginning to change the people at grassroots level if the people in control of that power are not willing to accept that changes must happen. So beginning those programs should begin at the top in all institutions.
Steve, we have about a minute and a half.
Do you see any positive movement in politically empowering the Maori people? Are there any bright spots on the horizon?
Yes, lots of women. Here I am. And whether in fact we want to belong to the same political structure that has been so destructive for our people is a question that's being debated right now in Aotearoa. Do we want to be part of that? Or do we want to create an independence and a structure that will benefit us as Maoris and our nation? Because we believe that what is good for Maoris will be good for the rest of the country.
Well, on that note, I must end the program. We're out of time. On behalf of Steve and our staff, we thank you so much. It's been a delight to interview you, and it's been most educational and informative. And again, we're so happy you could be in our city and our state.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this 3-week series. We certainly have enjoyed bringing it to you. And we also, again, want to thank Lewis Clark State College for their making these programs available to us so we could do these interviews. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.